Before we proceed with the story, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. In the comments section, we invite you to share your viewing location. The day in the kitchen was undoubtedly one of the most chaotic yet exhilarating moments of my life, and I have my stepsister Emma to thank for that. It all began as a typical Wednesday afternoon. The day began with a typical Wednesday afternoon. There was nothing remarkable at first. The house was eerily quiet, a strange stillness hanging in the air, broken only by the soft, rhythmic ticking of the wall clock in the kitchen. I had been home alone for most of the day, mindlessly flipping through TV channels, trying to pass the time as best I could. My dad and his wife, Olivia, were out. At first, there was nothing particularly noteworthy about the situation. The house was eerily quiet, with a peculiar stillness that seemed to hang in the air, only interrupted by the soft, rhythmic ticking of the wall clock in the kitchen. I had been home alone for most of the day, mindlessly flipping through TV channels in an attempt to pass the time. My father and his wife, Olivia, were out running errands or doing whatever it was they typically did when they disappeared together for hours. With them gone, the house was left in a rare, silent peace, with only me and Emma remaining in it. Emma and I had never been particularly close. We were about the same age, but we were almost complete opposites in terms of personality. She was always the one who had everything meticulously planned, the type who had a list for everything, down to the smallest details. I, on the other hand, was more laid back, the kind of person who preferred to go with the flow, content to let the day unfold naturally. We lived under the same roof, but our relationship had always been. We exchanged the occasional greeting, which was polite at best and distant at worst. However, over the past few weeks, there has been a noticeable shift in our interactions. I have observed that Emma has been looking at me differently. At first, I thought it was just me, but now I'm not sure. Her eyes seem to have a different expression than before. We were merely cordial, and at times, the atmosphere was even somewhat distant. However, over the past few weeks, there had been a noticeable shift. I became aware of subtle changes in Emma's behavior towards me. Initially, I attributed these observations to my imagination, but they persisted. For instance, her eyes would linger on me for a moment longer than usual, and she would often find reasons to be near me, even sitting slightly too close when we were together. While these behaviors were not overt and might not have been apparent to others, I perceived them and their subtle yet noticeable influence on my mood. Emma's prolonged presence in the vicinity was notable, as she persistently found reasons to be near me, even occupying close physical space. Although not overt, this behavior was evident to me and caused me discomfort. I experienced a sense of unease, which manifested as a physical reaction in my stomach. On that particular afternoon, I was seated in the kitchen, browsing through my phone in a state of disengagement. The sunlight penetrated the windows, casting a warm glow across the room. I was attempting to ignore the peculiar tension that pervaded the atmosphere whenever Emma was present. She had been in her room for the entire day, or so it seemed. I was in the kitchen that afternoon, scrolling through my phone. The sunlight streaming through the windows created a warm glow in the room. I was doing my best to ignore the strange tension that seemed to hang in the air whenever Emma was around. She had been in her room all day, I thought. The sound of footsteps behind me alerted me that she was no longer alone. I knew she was about to make her presence known. Emma's voice broke through the silence as she stepped into the kitchen. I looked up from my phone and saw her standing in the doorway, arms casually crossed over her chest. I was interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind me, which alerted me to the fact that Emma was no longer alone. I knew she was about to make her presence known. "Hey!" Emma's voice broke through the silence as she stepped into the kitchen. I looked up from my phone and saw her standing in the doorway, arms casually crossed over her chest. Her stance was relaxed, but there was something in the way she was looking at me. There was a flicker of something in her eyes that made my heart race just a little faster than usual. "Hey," I replied casually, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "What's up?" she shrugged, taking a few steps into the room. Her gaze never left mine. "Not much," she said. Stance was relaxed, but there was something in the way she was looking at me. Her eyes had a certain quality that made my heart race slightly faster than usual. "Hey," I replied casually, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "What's up?" she asked, shrugging and taking a few steps into the room. Her gaze never left mine. "It's pretty quiet in here." I felt like coming downstairs. I nodded, setting my phone down on the kitchen table, trying to ignore the odd flutter in my chest. "Yeah, it is. Olivia and Dad won't be back for a while." Emma glanced over at the wall clock and then back at me. A small, almost secretive smile played at the corners of her lips. "I know." I felt uneasy, but I couldn't deny that I was intrigued. She walked over to the stove, pulled a glass from the cabinet, and filled it with water. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if she knew I was watching her. I couldn't help but notice the way she moved and her hair falling. I nodded, setting my phone down on the kitchen table, trying to ignore the flutter in my chest. "It is Olivia, and Dad won't be back for a while." Emma glanced over at the wall clock and back at me. She had a small, secretive smile playing at the corners of her lips. I know. The words hung in the air, thick with an underlying meaning that I couldn't quite place. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten, though I wasn't entirely sure why. There was something different about the way she was looking at me. It was both playful and serious at the same time. I came down because the words seemed to carry an underlying meaning that I was unable to discern. Her tone made my stomach tighten, though I was unable to identify the reason. Her gaze, which was at once playful and serious, made me uneasy, yet I could not deny that it intrigued me. She walked over to the stove, pulled a glass from the cabinet, and filled it with water. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if she knew I was watching her. I couldn't help but note the way she moved, her hair falling. Her behavior was disconcerting, yet I found myself captivated. She approached the stove, selected a glass from the cabinet, and filled it with water. Her movements were deliberate, as if she knew I was observing her. Naturally, I found myself unable to look away. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and her expression was soft, yet knowing. Her lips curved slightly into a smile, and I found myself entranced. "What are you doing here alone?" she inquired, taking a sip from her glass before leaning casually against the counter. Her gaze remained fixed on mine. Her expression was inscrutable, her lips curving slightly into a smile that revealed no emotion. I was captivated, unable to look away. "What are you doing here alone?" she inquired, taking a sip from her glass and leaning casually against the counter. Her gaze remained fixed on me. I shrugged, attempting to maintain a steady voice and composure. "I'm just killing time until they return," I said, attempting to sound indifferent. "You've been acting strangely lately," she observed, her words catching me off guard. I frowned slightly, trying to understand her statement. "What do you mean?" Emma tilted her head, her expression inscrutable. I gave a slight shrug, attempting to maintain a neutral expression. "I'm not avoiding you," I said, my voice betraying a hint of unease. "I'm just trying to kill time until they return." She nodded in agreement, but her eyes remained fixed on me. "You've been acting strangely lately." Her words caught me off guard. I gave a slight frown, trying to comprehend her statement. "What do you mean?" Emma tilted her head, her smile widening slightly, as if she had a clear understanding of the situation. "I don't know. You've been avoiding me." Her observation struck me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't thought of it that way, but now that she had mentioned it, I realized that I might have been keeping my distance from her. It wasn't intentional, I didn't even. Her smile broadened slightly, as if she had some insight into the situation. I hadn't realized that I had been distancing myself from her. I hadn't intended to, but I couldn't deny that something had changed between us. It was as if we were walking around an invisible tension that we were both unaware of and unable to resolve. I told her, "I'm not avoiding you." My voice lacked the usual confidence, and it sounded more like a half utterance. I was aware of the reasons for my actions, but I couldn't deny that something between us had changed. It was as if we were walking around a quiet tension that neither of us knew how to address, and I was at a loss for how to handle it. "I'm not avoiding you," I said quickly, though my voice lacked the usual confidence. It sounded more like a half-hearted excuse than an actual explanation. She raised an eyebrow, setting her glass down on the counter with a soft clink. "Really? Because it feels like you are," she replied. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, unsure of how to respond. The truth was, I'd been avoiding her, or at least I'd been trying to. I've been avoiding her, or at least I've been trying to, I muttered, my voice reflecting a hint of unease. Something about the way she's been looking at me lately is unsettling, yet strangely compelling. I'm not sure if it's just me or if she feels the same way, but it's beginning to take a toll on me. I've just been busy. I have been preoccupied lately, and this has led to a certain sense of unease in my professional interactions. Emma's smile broadened as she moved closer, and her eyes showed a mixture of challenge, curiosity, and a depth of emotion that was difficult to discern. I felt a sense of being overwhelmed, and I realized that I needed to address this issue. I felt weak, even as I spoke. It wasn't a great explanation, but it was all I could come up with at the moment. Emma's smile widened as she stepped closer. Her eyes glinted with a gleam that was impossible to place, a mix of challenge, curiosity, and something deeper, something intense. Busy, huh? Too busy to even talk to me. There was a teasing lilt to her voice, but beneath it, I could sense something more. An undercurrent of seriousness that gave weight to her words. She wasn't just messing around. There was something real, unspoken, something that had been simmering for a long time. I couldn't help I could sense the implications of what she was saying, and I felt a sense of unease. It was as if she was daring me to acknowledge what was happening between us, something I had been trying so hard to avoid. I'm not avoiding you, Emma, I repeated, though my voice was softer now, lacking conviction. The uncertainty in my tone made it clear that I wasn't even convincing myself. She took another step forward, and the distance between us shrank until she was just a few feet away. Her presence was almost overwhelming, and the energy in the room seemed to shift. The tension between us thickened until it felt almost tangible. I swallowed hard. Keeping my composure became challenging as I felt my pulse accelerating. I believe you are, she said in a soft tone, her eyes never leaving mine. Her gaze seemed to search for something hidden deep within me. You don't have to, I said, blinking momentarily, taken aback by her words. The kitchen suddenly seemed smaller. I felt my pulse quicken as I struggled to maintain composure. You are, she said, her eyes never leaving mine, searching as though she were looking for something hidden deep within me. But you don't have to. I blinked, momentarily stunned by her words. The kitchen suddenly seemed smaller, the walls closing in, and the air between us was charged with a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. Emma's presence, the warmth of her body so close, was clouding my thoughts, and I found it impossible to think straight. I don't know what you're talking about, I managed to say, though the words came out hollow, empty. I managed to say, though the words came out. Emma was standing very close to me, and I could feel her warmth and the heat radiating off her skin. I could feel a shiver run through my body. I could feel my resolve weakening and crumbling beneath the weight of what was happening. I could feel my resolve weakening, crumbling beneath the weight of what was happening. Emma stepped even closer, her face now just inches from mine. I could feel her warmth, the heat radiating off her skin, and it sent a shiver through me. My heart pounded. In my chest, my mind raced as I tried to process what was unfolding before me. This was Emma, my stepsister, someone I'd lived with for the past 2 years. But at this moment, she felt like something else entirely, like a stranger, and yet someone incredibly familiar at the same time. I was attempting to process the situation when Emma, my stepsister, who I had lived with for 2 years, felt like an entirely new person, yet simultaneously someone incredibly familiar. Her voice, barely audible, revealed a hint of vulnerability, despite her confident demeanor. I could feel the tension and connection between us, which had been growing for weeks. I had attempted to disregard it, convincing myself that it was merely a figment of my imagination. However, now that I find myself standing so close to her, her eyes locked on mine, there is no denying it. If you are still watching this video and find the story inspiring, please leave a comment to let me know. I had attempted to disregard it, attempting to convince myself that it was merely a figment of my imagination, that it was not tangible. However, now that I find myself standing so close to her, her eyes fixed intently on mine, I can no longer deny it. If you are still watching this video and find the story inspiring, please leave a comment to let me know you're still with my began, but my voice trailed off, unable to formulate coherent thoughts. It felt as if my mind had gone blank, the rational part of me silenced by the sheer intensity of the moment. Emma's hand moved, and she reached out to gently brush against my arm. The touch was feather-light. "I know you're still with me," I started, but my voice trailed off. Unable to form coherent thoughts, it felt like my mind had gone blank. The rational part of me silenced by the sheer intensity of the moment. Emma's hand moved, then reached out to brush against my arm. The touch was feather-light, barely perceptible, yet it sent a jolt of electricity through me. The contact made my pulse spike, and my breath hitched in my throat as I struggled to stay composed. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered, her lips curving into that small, knowing smile. It was a smile that made my heart race and made my entire body tingle. I felt a strong physical reaction, but I resisted the urge to speak. Before I could comprehend the situation, Emma moved closer and brushed her lips against my cheek. Her gesture was deliberate and powerful, igniting every nerve in my body. My body reacted in ways I couldn't control. Before I could utter a word, before I could even grasp what was happening, Emma leaned in and brushed her lips against my cheek. The gesture was simple, almost innocent, yet it set me on fire. I stood frozen, unable to move, as the reality of what was happening hit me. This wasn't just in my head, this wasn't just some unspoken tension that I had imagined. Emma felt it too, and now, with her lips against my skin, there was no going back. "Emma," I whispered, my voice barely above a whisper. I was innocent, yet I felt a strong emotional response. I stood, frozen, unable to move, as I processed the reality of the situation. This was not just in my head, it was real, and I felt it. Emma felt it too, and now, with her lips against my skin, there was no going back. "Emma," I whispered, barely audible, trembling. I wasn't even sure what I wanted to say. Part of me wanted to push her away, to stop this before it went any further, before we crossed a line we could never uncross. But there was another part of me, a part that I had tried so hard to ignore, that wanted her to stay close, that wanted to see. I could barely make out the trembling, and I was uncertain about what I wanted to say. Part of me wanted to end the interaction to prevent it from escalating, but there was another part of me, a part that I had tried to suppress, that wanted her to stay close and see what would happen. She did not move away. Instead, she smiled, her soft, knowing smile, which seemed to understand something about me that I did not understand. She asked a question, her tone light and almost innocent, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, but we both knew that was not true. The tension between us was palpable, as if we were conducting electricity. We couldn't ignore it. I began to say something, but the words felt hollow and empty, as if they belonged to someone else. My heart was pounding, and my thoughts were racing. This was wrong, wasn't it? The tension between us was palpable, as if we were standing on the brink of an electrical storm. I attempted to continue, but the words felt hollow and empty, as if they belonged to someone else. My heart was racing, and my thoughts were racing as well, each one seemingly leading to a different conclusion. Was Emma my stepsister? We couldn't do this. This wasn't supposed to happen. But then she moved again, taking yet another step closer until her body brushed lightly against mine. The contact was electric, sending a shock wave through me that made my knees weak. Her eyes held mine unwaveringly, filled with something. I was taken aback by the realization that Emma was my stepsister. This situation was not the way it was supposed to unfold. However, she continued to advance, gradually drawing nearer to me until their bodies were almost touching. The contact was palpable, sending a surge of energy through me that made me feel unsteady. Her eyes remained fixed on me, expressing a complex array of emotions that I struggled to identify. It might have been desire, curiosity, or even hope. Her hand moved up, and her fingers gently touched my chest. I felt my breath catch, my chest tightening, and for a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe, as if the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving me adrift in a sea of emotions. I was overwhelmed by a complex array of emotions, including confusion, excitement, and fear. However, there was also a sense of unease, a feeling I was reluctant to identify. Emma's eyes never left mine as she spoke, and her gaze held a challenge and a question in the air between us. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I swallowed, trying to gather my thoughts. I felt a complex array of emotions, including confusion, excitement, and fear. There was also a sense of unease, the nature of which I was unable to define. Emma's eyes never left mine as she spoke, and her gaze held a challenge and a question. I felt a sense of pressure to respond, but it was difficult to form words due to her proximity and the sensation of her touch. Her touch was sending ripples through my entire body. I attempted to articulate the reason for my response, but my voice was shaky and uncertain. It did not resemble my usual tone. Emma's hand slid down my chest, her fingers tracing a slow, low, deliberate path that made my skin tingle and my heart race. I was unable to formulate a coherent thought due to the proximity of Emma and the emotional response her touch elicited. Her presence was palpable, and her touch was deliberate and slow, causing my skin to tingle and my heart to race. "Do you want this just as much as I do?" Emma asked, her lips curving into a playful smile. Her words struck me with intensity, and I felt my body stiffen in response. Was Emma correct in her assessment? I had wanted this all along. The thought caused a shiver to run down my spine, and I felt a surge of emotion. "Race, do I?" she inquired, her tone soft and inviting. Her lips curved into a playful smile, a mixture of anticipation and seduction. "It seems to me like you've been wanting this just as much as I have," she continued, her words laced with a hint of intrigue. Her words resonated with me, and I felt my body respond instinctively. I felt a surge of guilt, but at the same time, there was something else, something stronger, a part of me that had been waiting for this moment, that had been craving it without even realizing it. I attempted to speak, but the words caught in my throat, trailing off into a silence. My mind felt a mix of emotions, including a sense of anticipation. I felt a sense of guilt, but at the same time, I sensed something else, a deep, longing yearning that had been awaiting this moment. I attempted to speak, but the words stuck in my throat, and I fell silent. My mind felt muddled and overwhelmed. Emma moved closer, her body now fully against mine. I could feel her heart beating rapidly against my chest, and I could sense her warmth and intensity. Her eyes were locked on mine, and they conveyed a complex mixture of emotions that made it impossible for me to, amidst the fog of confusion and overwhelming feelings. Emma moved in closer, her body now fully aligned with mine. I could sense the rapid beating of her heart against my chest, her warmth enveloping me. Her eyes were fixed on mine, and they conveyed a complex blend of emotions that made it impossible to look away. I felt as if I was being pulled under by an unseen force, one that was both mysterious and alluring. Emma's whispering voice, "You don't have to be afraid," was like a lighthouse amidst the storm, guiding me through the tumultuous emotions. Her hand gently traced the side of my neck, her thumb brushing against my jaw, creating a gentle touch that intensified the beating of my heart. I felt as though I was drowning in her gaze. I felt pulled under by something I didn't understand, but I couldn't resist. "You don't have to be afraid," she whispered. Her hand slid up to rest on the side of my neck. Her thumb brushed lightly against my jaw. It was a gentle touch that made my heart pound even harder. "You don't have to pretend anymore." It felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. It felt like everything I thought I knew was changing, and I was powerless to stop it. There was a part of me that knew this was wrong. There was a part of me that knew this was a line we shouldn't cross. But there was another part of me, a deeper, more primal part, that wanted this. This desire had been present for a significant period, one that I had previously denied. "Emma," I made another attempt, but my voice faltered, and I was unable to find the words. She shook her head, her fingers brushing against my lips, silencing me with the gentlest of touches. "It's okay," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You don't have to say anything." And then, "Emma, I've wanted this for a long time." I attempted to say this again, but I faltered. I couldn't find the words. She shook her head, her fingers brushing against my lips, and she silenced me with the gentlest of touches. "It's okay," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. "You don't have to say anything." And then, before I could stop her, before I could even think of what to do next, Emma leaned in, her lips pressing against mine in a kiss that was tender and electric all at once. It was gentle at first, hesitant, as if she was giving me the chance to pull away, but I couldn't. Instead, I found myself kissing her back. My hands moved instinctively to her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, and I felt a wave of heat rush through me. Every nerve in my body was on high alert, and every inch of my skin buzzed with the intensity of the moment. It felt like time had stopped, like there our lips met, and the kiss was more than just a physical connection. It was an overwhelming surge of sensation, an undeniable force that made everything else fade into the background. I struggled to catch my breath and process the reality of the situation. This was happening, and every part of me, every nerve, screamed that I didn't want it to end. As our hands moved instinctively to each other's waists, pulling us closer, the kiss deepened. It was slow and deliberate, and I felt a wave of heat rush through me, spreading like wildfire. Every nerve in my body was on high alert, every inch of my skin buzzed with the intensity of the moment. It felt like time had stopped, like there was nothing in the world but the two of us, caught in this impossible, forbidden moment that neither of us could walk away from. Emma's hand slid up my back, her fingers weaving through my hair and hugging me closer. The heat of her body pressed against mine, and I could feel the rapid rise and fall of her chest as our lips met, and the kiss was more than a mere physical contact. It was an overwhelming surge of sensations, an undeniable force that made all else fade into obscurity. I struggled to catch my breath, to comprehend the reality of the situation. This was unfolding before my eyes, and every fiber of my being, every nerve, screamed that I didn't want it to end. When we parted ways after a brief yet profound moment of connection. Both of us were momentarily overwhelmed, and we stood there, our foreheads resting against each other, catching our breaths in the tranquil kitchen. The world around us felt distant, as if it no longer existed. Time seemed to stretch out, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as if we were suspended in a world where nothing else mattered except for the two of us. There was no past, no future, just the present. What just happened? I whispered, my voice trembling slightly as I struggled to comprehend the recent shift in our relationship. Emma's smile was small, but it contained something I couldn't fully identify. It was soft, but also mischievous, as she looked up at me. In that moment, our focus was completely on each other. There was no consideration of the past or future. Our attention was fully engaged by the present. I articulated my question, my voice reflecting a slight tremor as I struggled to comprehend the recent transformation. Emma's smile, though diminutive, exhibited a nuance I couldn't fully identify. It was gentle, yet it contained a hint of mischief as she directed her gaze at me. "What does it feel like?" she inquired, her voice subdued yet discerning, as if seeking to delve deeper. I experienced a strong inclination to swallow, my mind still a tumult of confusion and desire. I was uncertain how to articulate my thoughts. It was as if all the mounting tension and unspoken sentiments between us, the glances, the mounting tension, the subtle. "Emma," I inquired, "what does this feel like?" Her voice was quiet but probing, as though seeking something deeper. I swallowed hard. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and desire. I didn't know how to articulate it. It was as though everything that had been building between us, everything unspoken, the glances, the tension, the subtle touches, had erupted. In its wake, I was left reeling. But it wasn't just the kiss itself that threw me. It was the realization that there was no going back. What had happened was irreversible. "I don't know," I confess quietly. My hands linger on her waist, as though the touch could ground me in this moment. In this touches had escalated rapidly, and I was left reeling. It wasn't just the kiss itself that took me by surprise, it was the realization that the situation was irreversible. "I don't know," I confess quietly, my hands lingering on her waist as though the touch could ground me in this moment. This reality. "But we can't do this." Emma's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she stood there, unmoving, looking at me with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. She didn't look away, her gaze unwavering, piercing through me with an unspoken question. "Why not?" she asked her. Emma's smile showed a momentary hesitation, but she did not pull away. Instead, she stood there, unmoving, looking at me with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. She did not look away. Her gaze was unwavering, piercing me with an unspoken question. "Why not?" she asked. Her voice was low but steady, as if she was daring me to find an answer. Her words struck me like a jolt of electricity, confusion and excitement mixing in my chest. I was not prepared to confront this. I told myself that this had to be wrong, but the way she was looking at me, the heat still lingering on her voice was low but steady, and her words were like a jolt of electricity. I felt a mix of confusion and excitement in my chest. I thought to myself that this had to be wrong, but the way she was looking at me, the heat still lingering on my skin from her touch, made it impossible to deny. She made me question everything I thought I knew. "I mean, you're my stepsister." I said the words, feeling weak even as they left my mouth. I felt a flutter of doubt as I said them, like I was grasping for something, anything that could make sense of this. Emma raised an eyebrow. Her touch made it impossible to deny the connection between us. I questioned everything I thought I knew. "I mean, she's my stepsister." I said the words, feeling weak even as they left my mouth. I felt a flutter of doubt as I said them, like I was grasping for something, anything that could make sense of this. Emma raised an eyebrow, a smirk pulling at the corners of her lips. "Early?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm, as though she were reminding me of something obvious. "We're not related by blood. We're just two people. You don't have to let that stop you." Her logic made my mind spin. "Technically." Her voice was gentle but firm as she inquired, "You're not blood relatives, but that doesn't mean you can't be connected. Our connection is through our parents' marriage, a piece of paper and a shared household." But the weight of this felt suffocating. The societal rules and the disapproving whispers of the world were pressing down on me. But what about them? What about Dad and Olivia? My voice was barely audible as I inquired about my parents' thoughts on the matter. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I also felt a sense of grounding in the knowledge of what was at stake. If you're still watching this video and find the story inspiring, please leave a comment to let me know you're still with me. Emma's. With a slight tremor in her voice, Emma's smile faded, and she took a step back, creating a palpable distance between us. Her quiet murmur revealed a hint of vulnerability, yet I understood that I could no longer feign indifference to the evident connection between us. Her words were like a dagger, sharp and precise, cutting through any remaining doubts I might have had. It was the truth. We had both been dancing around the undeniable reality that we couldn't ignore any longer. We couldn't keep pretending the pole between us had grown too strong, the tension too palpable now that we had crossed this line, and there was no turning back. The question remained, what should we do next? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper as the storm of emotions inside me threatened to overwhelm me. Emma's eyes softened, and her shoulders relaxed as if she were trying to find some comfort in my confusion. "We don't have to figure everything out at once. Everything is out right now," she said gently, her words offering a surprising sense of calm. "We can take it one step at a time." Her voice was soft and reassuring, calming the hurricane of thoughts in my mind. Perhaps she was right. We didn't need to have all the answers at this moment. We just had to be honest with ourselves. "Anne. Everything is under control," she said, her words offering a surprising sense of calm. "We can take it one step at a time." Her voice was soft and reassuring, and it calmed the hurricane of thoughts in my mind. Maybe she was right. We didn't need to have all the answers at that moment. We just had to be honest with ourselves and with each other. The rest could wait. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension ease slightly, though the weight of the moment still clung to me like a second skin. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than before. "One step at a time." Emma smiled, and it was a real, genuine smile that made my heart flutter in my chest. There was a warmth. We were in each other's presence, and the rest could wait. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension ease slightly, though the weight of the moment still clung to me like a second skin. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than before. Emma smiled, and it was a genuine smile that made my heart flutter in my chest. There was a warmth in it, a trust. At that moment, I wanted to believe that we could figure this out together. "We'll figure it out," she said quietly. I believed her, but even as the words left her mouth, I knew the story wasn't over yet. This was only the beginning. In the days that followed, everything between us seemed to change. The kiss, the confessions, had ignited something neither of us could extinguish. The tension that had simmered for so long now felt like a living thing, twisting and growing, suffusing every moment we spent together. We tried to go about our days like nothing had happened, but it was impossible. Every time our eyes met, it was clear that a new dynamic had emerged. I felt every brush of our hands, and I could see the same intensity in Emma's eyes. We both understood that something had shifted, and neither of us could pretend it hadn't. One evening, about a week later, I found myself sitting on the couch, trying to focus on the TV. I felt a sense of unease, and I could see that Emma felt the same. We were both aware that something had shifted, and neither of us could pretend otherwise. One evening, about a week later, I found myself sitting on the couch, trying to focus on the TV, but my mind wouldn't settle. I could hear Emma in the kitchen, the soft clink of plates and the sound of drawers sliding shut as she cleaned up after dinner. Dad and Olivia were out again, probably at some event, leaving the house quiet and empty. Just the two of us, alone with our thoughts, with everything unsettled. The silence of the house only served to exacerbate the tension, making it more difficult to ignore the underlying issues. It was inevitable that we would have to confront them. The house felt eerily quiet, a weighty and oppressive stillness that felt immobilizing. It was the type of silence that the silence in the house was palpable, and it was difficult to ignore the underlying tension. It was inevitable that we would soon have to confront the situation. The silence was so intense that it made my thoughts seem overwhelming. I couldn't stop thinking about Emma and the way her lips felt against mine, how her touch felt like fire across my skin, leaving a trail of heat behind. The memory of that kiss haunted me, but it was more than just the kiss. It was the way her eyes. I was overwhelmed by the silence, which made my thoughts feel too loud. I couldn't stop thinking about Emma, about the way her lips had felt against mine, how her touch had burned through my skin and left a trail of heat in its wake. The memory of that kiss haunted me, but it was more than just the kiss. It was the way her eyes had looked at me, the way her body had responded to mine, and the knowledge that everything had changed between us. Every moment alone with her was charged and electric, and the more I tried to push it away, the stronger the pull became. Just as I was about to stand up and retreat to my room to escape the whirlwind, I was suddenly struck by the realization that my thoughts had been interrupted by Emma's presence in the living room doorway. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel, her movements slow and deliberate. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She stood there, watching me with an unreadable expression. The silence between us was palpable, and when her gaze locked onto mine, Emma entered the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her movements were slow and deliberate. We were both silent for a moment, and she stood there, watching me with an unreadable expression. The quiet was uncomfortable, and when her gaze locked onto mine, I felt a shiver run down my spine. My pulse quickened as if her presence was enough to send my heart into overdrive. "You okay?" Emma asked, her voice soft but with a subtle undercurrent of tension. I nodded quickly, though my throat felt tight, and my words came out a little choked. I felt a shiver run down my spine. My pulse quickened as if her presence was enough to send my heart into overdrive. "You okay?" Her voice was soft, but there was something in it, a subtle undercurrent of tension, something I couldn't quite place. I nodded quickly, though my throat felt tight, my words a little choked. "Yeah, just thinking," I managed to get out, but even as I spoke, I could feel the weight of the lie. I wasn't just thinking, I was consumed by her, by us, and it was something I wasn't ready to admit. Emma stepped into the room, the air thickening with every step she took toward me. She tossed the dish towel onto the chair by the sink. I was thinking that I had managed to escape, but even as I spoke, I could feel the weight of the lie. I wasn't just thinking, I was consumed by her, by us, and it was something I wasn't ready to admit. Emma stepped into the room, the air thickening with every step she took toward me. She tossed the dish towel onto the chair by the door and sat down on the edge of the couch, just a few feet away from where I sat. The presence made the space feel smaller and more intimate. The tension between us was palpable, and I could almost hear the unspoken words hanging between us. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't tell if it was out. I felt a sense of excitement, fear, and uncertainty about the situation. Emma's quiet but insistent voice prompted me to consider my options. I paused, uncertain how to respond, and realized that I had been thinking about her and our relationship since that night in the kitchen. I've been thinking about her, about us, since that night in the kitchen. I've been thinking about everything, the kiss, the pull between us, the consequences of what we were doing. But I couldn't bring myself to say any of it out loud. I wasn't sure I was ready to face what was happening, just everything I said. My voice was barely a whisper, barely enough to make sense of the chaos in my mind. Emma nodded slowly, her gaze still locked. I recognized the pull between us, the potential consequences of our actions, but I hesitated to verbalize it. I wasn't prepared to address the situation. Emma nodded in agreement, her gaze fixed on me intently. "Yeah, me too," she replied gently, her voice resonating with a depth that stirred my emotions. We sat in silence for a few seconds, both of us immersed in our respective thoughts. The unspoken tension between us was like a thick fog, enveloping everything, and I could feel it intensifying around me. I understood that if I didn't disengage from this interaction, if I didn't create some physical and emotional distance between us, the situation would intensify, and I would find myself in a situation that I was not prepared for. However, I did not disengage. Instead, I found myself leaning towards Emma, drawn by an inexplicable force that overcame me. Emma did not reciprocate. I was aware that if I did not disengage from the situation, if I did not create some physical and emotional distance between us, the situation would intensify, and events would occur that I was not prepared for. However, I did not disengage. Instead, I found myself leaning toward Emma, drawn by an inexplicable, profound connection. Emma did not pull away. She held my gaze, her eyes softening with a tenderness that made my chest tighten. I could see the desire in her eyes, the same intensity that had been present from the beginning. She wanted this too. We had agreed to take things slow. I murmured, my voice shaky with uncertainty. Emma smiled, a small, knowing smile. She looked away, but her gaze remained fixed on me. Her eyes showed tenderness, and her breathing grew labored. I could see the desire in her eyes, the same intensity that had been present from the beginning. She wanted this, too. We had agreed to take things slowly. I spoke, my voice trembling with uncertainty. Emma smiled, a knowing smile that sent a warm sensation through me. "We are taking it slow," she said gently. Her words conveyed quiet assurance, though her smile suggested otherwise. "But that doesn't mean we have to ignore what's happening." Her words ignited a strong, uncontrollable reaction within me, something undeniable. Before I could stop myself, I felt a surge of warmth. "We are taking it slow," she said, her words a quiet assurance, though her smile suggested otherwise. "However, this doesn't mean we have to ignore what's happening." Her words sparked something inside me, a sense of excitement, a palpable connection. Before I could stop myself, I leaned in, closing the distance between us. Emma met me halfway, and our lips brushed against each other in a hesitant kiss. At first, it was tentative, as if we were both testing the waters. But this time, there was no hesitation, no second thoughts. We were both surrendering to the connection that had been building for weeks. We were in close physical proximity, with Emma's lips coming into contact with mine. The kiss was initially hesitant and tentative, as if we were testing the waters. However, this time there was no hesitation, no second thoughts. We surrendered to the passionate embrace that had been building for weeks. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate. I felt Emma's hands slide up to the back of my neck, her fingers gently brushing through my hair as she pulled me closer. My heart raced, and I took in shallow breaths. Her touch sent shocks of electricity through my body. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The world outside. Kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, and I felt Emma's hands slide up to the back of my neck, her fingers threading through my hair as she pulled me closer. My heart raced, and my breath came in shallow gasps as her touch sent shocks of electricity through my body. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The world outside. The rules, the consequences, they all faded away. All I could feel, all I could think about, was her warmth, her touch, her presence. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathing heavily, our foreheads resting together as we tried to regain some semblance of composure, it felt like the world had shifted again. The rules, the consequences, they all disappeared. All that remained was the sensation of her warmth, her touch, her presence. When we finally separated, both of us breathing heavily, our foreheads resting together as we attempted to regain our composure, it felt as if the world had shifted again. Everything around us seemed to blur, and for a moment, it felt as if we were the only two people left in existence. If you're still watching this video and find the story inspiring, please leave a comment to let me know you're still with me. We should probably stop. I said quietly, the words slipping out before everything around us seemed to blur, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people left in existence. If you're still watching this video and find the story inspiring, please leave a comment to let me know we should probably stop. I said quietly, the words slipping out before I could even think them through. I didn't mean it. My hands were still resting on her waist, and I didn't want to let go. Emma smiled softly, her fingers brushing the side of my face in a way that made my heart swell. Do you want to stop? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, my heart racing, torn between. I was able to formulate a response. I don't mean it, I said, my voice laced with uncertainty. My hands remained on her waist, and I was reluctant to disengage. Emma smiled gently, her fingers tracing the side of my face, and my heart swelled with emotion. Do you want to stop? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I paused, my heart racing, torn between the desire to proceed and the apprehension regarding the potential implications. I'm uncertain, I admitted. I just don't want to complicate things. Emma lay on her side, her forehead still against mine, the quiet sound of her breath intermingling with mine. I understand, she said gently. But perhaps we're not causing any complications. I felt a sense of uncertainty, accompanied by a fear of making mistakes. I understand, Emma said, her voice expressing understanding. She continued, I don't want to complicate things. I understand your concerns, but perhaps we're just figuring things out. Her words resonated with me, and I felt that she was right. This didn't feel like a mistake, it felt like something that had been building for a long time and finally came to the surface. I'm not sure what we are, but I recognize that this is significant. Perhaps we were simply coming to an understanding. Her words lingered in the air between us, and I felt validated. This wasn't a mistake, it was something that had been building for a long time, finally coming to the surface. I didn't know what to do next. I whispered the question, and it hung in the air like a weight I couldn't shake. Emma leaned in, her lips brushing against my ear, but I know she said, her voice low and sure. In that moment, I couldn't deny it anymore. Without thinking, without holding back, I kissed her again. I inquired about her intentions, my voice barely audible above the ambient noise. Emma inclined toward me, her lips barely grazing my ear, and spoke in a low, measured tone. I was unable to deny the situation any longer. Without hesitation, I responded with another kiss, more passionate this time, fueled by the underlying tension between us. The kiss transcended its initial form, becoming an explosion of emotions, a cathartic release of all that we had been holding in. I didn't realize how quickly the situation escalated until it was over, but by then, neither of us was concerned. We had surrendered to the moment. The encounter was more intense this time, driven by the connection between us. The kiss evolved into an event of significant magnitude, a cathartic release of our innermost feelings. I became unaware of the rapid progression of events until they came to an end. By then, neither of us was concerned with the external circumstances. We had surrendered to the chemistry between us. When she pulled away, she stood up, adjusting her posture as she looked at me with a smile that conveyed an unspoken sentiment. We'll figure it out, she said quietly, and then left upstairs. I nodded in agreement, though deep down, I recognized the complexity of the situation. The days that followed were marked by a sense of suspended reality. Emma and I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. Every interaction, every touch, and every quiet moment between us carried the weight of what had been unsaid. We did not discuss the events that had transpired, but the connection between us was evident. The connection between us was undeniable, and it was impossible to ignore. The more we attempted to act as if everything was normal, the more tension built up. It was as if we were both walking a fine line, too scared to fall in either direction, but at the same time, we were drawn to each other. I tried to continue with my routine and act as if nothing had changed, but it had. The undeniable tension between us was palpable. The more we attempted to act normally, the more the tension increased. It was as if we were both on a tightrope, too scared to fall off in either direction, but also drawn to the other to stop. I attempted to continue with my usual routine, but it was difficult. Emma's presence in the house was a constant reminder of what had happened and of what we were becoming. Every time I heard her footsteps or caught her looking at me, I felt that spark again, that pull, and I couldn't stop it. I didn't know how Emma walked into the kitchen with such deliberate slowness. Emma's presence in the house was a constant reminder of the past and our current situation. Her footsteps and gazes evoked a sense of unease. I observed her entering the kitchen with a deliberate pace, her steps purposeful yet measured. As she proceeded to sit across from me, I felt my pulse accelerate. The room was dimly lit, the soft light from the overhead lamp casting shadows that accentuated the tension in the air. Her steps were deliberate, yet the pace was unhurried. Each movement was palpable, and as she proceeded across the room to sit opposite me, I sensed my pulse accelerating. The room was subdued, the dim light from the overhead lamp casting shadows that served to underscore the tension in the air. After a prolonged moment, Emma remained silent, her eyes fixed on me, her expression inscrutable but intense. "We need to talk," she finally stated, her voice measured and composed, yet carrying a weight that caused my heart to race. The words hung between us, undeniable and unavoidable, and I recognized that this conversation was imminent. After a long pause, Emma spoke. She didn't look at me, her eyes were fixed on the floor. Her expression was difficult to read, but it was clear that she was nervous. "We need to talk," she said finally. Her voice was low and steady, but her words carried a weight that made my heart race. It was clear that this conversation had been inevitable. We couldn't continue pretending that nothing had happened and that everything was the same as before. The issue was too significant to ignore. I put the magazine down and my fingers trembled slightly as I spoke. "Yeah, I understand," I replied, my voice shaky and showing the anxiety I felt. It was clear that our actions were leading to an inevitable conclusion. It was no longer possible to pretend that the situation was unchanged. The issue was too significant to ignore. I set the magazine down and my fingers trembled slightly as I spoke. "Yes, I agree," I said, my voice expressing the anxiety I felt in my stomach. "It seems we have no choice." Emma leaned forward and placed her hands on the table in front of her. She stared at me, searching for something, an answer, or perhaps a sign that I knew what to do. The silence between us was uncomfortable, as if the weight of all the unspoken issues between us was pressing down. "I'm not sure how to proceed," Emma said, her voice expressing a combination of uncertainty and vulnerability. She paused, her gaze fixed on me, as if searching for guidance or an acknowledgement of the situation. The silence between us felt heavy and uncomfortable, as if the unspoken tension was weighing down on both of us. I could sense this tension in my stomach, gnawing at me. "I don't know what to do," Emma continued, her voice expressing a hint of uncertainty. Her eyes conveyed a sense of confusion and hesitation. "I'm not sure how we're supposed to act now." I swallowed hard, the words stuck in my throat. I admitted quietly, "I'm not sure either." I felt a sense of uncertainty regarding the appropriate course of action. I was at a loss, with no clear solutions or answers. However, I recognized the significant change in our relationship and the irreversible nature of our actions. Emma's abrupt question, her voice barely above a whisper, struck me like a bolt of electricity. I was caught off guard by Emma's abrupt question. "Do you regret it?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet the impact was significant. I wasn't prepared for such a direct inquiry, especially at this early stage. I hadn't anticipated facing this issue. Did I regret the kisses, the stolen moments, or the growth of our connection over time? My mind was in a state of flux, but the answer was clear: no. I responded in a quiet but firm tone, shaking my head slightly. "I don't regret." I was not prepared for this, nor was I prepared for the consequences of our actions. I had not anticipated the emotional impact of our interactions, nor had I foreseen the growth of our relationship. My mind was in a state of turmoil, but the answer was evident. I shook my head in disapproval, but my voice remained calm. "I do not regret it." I observed her shoulders relaxing slightly, and I noticed the flicker of relief in her eyes. She admitted it, her voice a little steadier now, though I could still hear the remnants of fear in it. "I am scared," I stated, my brow furrowing as I leaned forward slightly. My heart pounded with a mixture of concern and I observed a slight relaxation in her shoulders and a flicker of relief in her eyes. She also admitted her voice to be a little steadier, though I could still hear the remnants of fear in it. "I'm scared," I said, my brow furrowing as I leaned forward slightly. My heart pounded with a mixture of concern and confusion. "I'm scared of what this means," she said, her voice trembling just slightly as if she was trying to hold herself together. "I'm scared of what happens if we keep going. I'm scared of what happens if we don't." Her words struck a chord. I was taken aback by her words, which resonated with me deeply. I understood the gravity of her situation and felt a sense of unease. On one hand, I recognized the potential benefits of pursuing this connection, but on the other hand, I was apprehensive about the potential consequences. I was taken aback by her words. I understood her meaning, and I felt a sense of unease. I had a strong inclination to continue, to explore the potential of this connection, but another part of me was deeply concerned about the possible consequences for our family, my father, and Olivia. I was uncertain about the nature of the mistake we might be making, or whether it was irreversible. I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper, the words heavy on my chest. "I don't want to lose you." She looked up at me, and I continued. Her eyes conveyed a complex blend of emotion, understanding, and uncertainty. "You won't," she said softly, her words laden with tenderness that stirred my heart. "We have to figure this out." I nodded, my chest tightening. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air around us was thick with unspoken tension, the weight of unresolved issues pressing down on us. The tension between us remained palpable, undeniable and electric. But now, there was also a new dimension, understanding. We recognized that we couldn't continue like this. We had to make a decision for both of us. Suddenly, Emma, she stood up, pushing her chair back with a soft scrape that reverberated in the silent room. She walked over to the window, gazing out at the darkening sky, her arms crossed over her chest. I observed her for a moment, my mind racing as I tried to determine the appropriate course of action. I wanted to reach out to her. She turned to face me, her expression serious, the lines of tension around her eyes clear. She gestured for a moment, her arms crossed over her chest, then walked over to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. I watched her for a moment, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to say and what to do next. I wanted to reach out to her, to close the distance, but I knew that wasn't the answer we needed. We needed clarity. If you're still tuning into this video and find the story inspiring, please leave a comment to let me know you're still with me. After a long moment, Emma spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "What?" She suggested that we take a break, but she remained turned toward me, even though I could hear the weight of her words. I expressed my confusion, and Emma turned to face me, her expression serious, the lines of tension around her eyes clear. She said, "Yeah, a break from." She proposed a respite, maintaining her back to me as she spoke, though I could discern the weight of her words. I repeated the suggestion, my brow furrowed in confusion. I was uncertain as to her intent. Emma turned to face me, her expression grave, the lines of tension around her eyes evident. "A break from whatever this is, to herself, to think, to figure out what we want." Her suggestion made sense, though it filled me with dread. The notion of stepping back, of creating distance between us, of taking a break from something that had been consuming me felt like an impossible task. It was terrifying, but at the same time, it was compelling. "We need to take some time for ourselves to figure things out," she said. "I agree with your suggestion. It makes sense, but it's also scary. It's hard to take a break from something we don't fully understand. At the same time, I know you're right. We can't continue like this, lost in the middle of something we don't fully understand." "Maybe that's a good idea," I said quietly. The words felt heavy in my mouth, weighed down by the fear of what a break might mean for us. Emma nodded, her eyes softening as she looked at me. "We don't have to make any decisions right now," she said gently. She walked back over to the table and sat across from me again. "But we need some space to figure things out." I nodded in agreement. For a moment, the room fell into silence, but this time it felt different. "We don't have to make any decisions right now," she said, her tone professional. She then walked back over to the table and sat down across from me again. "However, we need some space to figure things out." I nodded in agreement. "You're right," I said. The room fell into silence again, But this time it felt different. The tension wasn't gone, but it had shifted. It was still present, hovering between us, but now there was a sense of understanding, of mutual recognition that we were at a crossroads. We didn't have all the answers, but taking this step, this break, was the first step toward finding them. Emma reached out her hand, brushing. Tension persisted, but it had shifted. It was still present, but now there was a sense of understanding and recognition that we were at a crossroads. We didn't have all the answers, but taking this step, this break, was the first step toward finding them. Emma reached out her hand and brushed against mine. The simple touch sent a wave of warmth through me. Her touch was familiar and comforting, and at that moment, I realized that no matter what happened between us, I didn't want to lose her. She was too important to me. "We'll figure it out," she said softly, her thumb brushing over the back of my hand. Emma's touch was reassuring, and I felt a sense of optimism. Despite the circumstances, I believed that we could manage one day at a time. I nodded and squeezed her hand, and we continued to focus on the present. In that moment, I realized that Emma was right there with me. We were no longer in a state of urgency, and there was no need to make any hasty decisions. We didn't have to know all the answers. Now, all we had to do was take things one day at a time and allow whatever was meant to happen to unfold naturally. As the evening progressed, a quiet sense of peace settled between us, the palpable tension that had lingered for days dissipating. There was no urgency, no need to reach a hasty decision. We were at a point where we could take things one day at a time and allow the situation to unfold naturally. As the evening progressed, a quiet sense of peace settled between us, the palpable tension that had lingered for days beginning to dissipate, replaced by something softer and more reassuring. There was no need to address the complexity of what had happened or what might happen next. We didn't need to force any conversations. We simply needed to be there for each other, to be present and let time guide us. There was no need to rush or second guess. The intensity of our emotions subsided, and a sense of tranquility enveloped us. We no longer felt the need to address the intricacies of the situation or to contemplate its future implications. Instead, we chose to focus on each other's well-being, allowing time to work its magic. We refrained from physical intimacy, choosing instead to sit in close proximity at the kitchen table. The silence that ensued was no longer characterized by uncertainty but rather by a sense of peaceful acceptance. We held hands and conversed about seemingly trivial matters, our fingers interlaced as we discussed the day's events. The mundane aspects of daily life, which had previously been a source of distress, now offered a sense of solace. While the gravity of our circumstances remained, it was less overwhelming, and the storm within me had subsided. Despite the unknowns of the future, I found a measure of comfort in the simplicity of the present moment. While the future remained uncertain, I felt less overwhelmed. We had taken the first step toward addressing our situation, and for now, that was sufficient. As the minutes turned into hours, the house remained quiet, a stillness that felt safe and almost sacred. I realized something as we sat there. The glow of the kitchen light cast a warm. I was uncertain about the future, but I was willing to take it one step at a time with her by my side. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of uncertainty and relief. We didn't rush or push, we just existed in this new shared space, trying to navigate the complexities of our situation. As the minutes slipped into hours, the house remained quiet. A stillness that felt safe, almost sacred. I realized something as we sat there. The glow of the kitchen light cast a warm hue on her face. No matter what happened between Emma and me, no matter where this journey would take us, one thing had already become certain: I had crossed a line that could never be crossed. Yet, as I sat there looking at Emma, I felt no regret. The path ahead might be uncertain, but I wasn't afraid to walk it. While the future was uncertain, I was willing to take it one step at a time, as long as she was by my side. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of uncertainty and relief. We didn't rush or push, we just existed in this new shared space, trying to navigate the complexities of our situation. Our connection. There was no urgency to resolve all the uncertainties, as there was no predetermined time frame for defining our status or future trajectory. We embraced each day as it unfolded, utilizing this time to deepen our self-awareness and mutual understanding. While the future remained enigmatic, one aspect was indisputably clear: Undoubtedly, we were facing challenges together, navigating an uncertain future as we charted unknown territory. However, our readiness to explore this journey together provided a sense of comfort. I had never anticipated finding such strength in our partnership. As we reach the conclusion of this narrative, it becomes evident that emotions and confusion play a significant role in shaping our journey. We were facing the future together, and although the road ahead was uncertain, we were ready to explore it side by side. This in itself was a comfort. I had never expected to find myself in such a situation. As we reach the end of this story, we see how powerful emotions, confusion, and the challenges of relationships can shape our decisions. From the tension between Emma and me to the decision to take a step back and reevaluate our relationship, it's clear that sometimes life presents us with situations that leave us questioning everything. So, what have you learned so far? How would you approach the challenges of relationships can influence our decision-making? This can be seen in the tension between Emma and me, as well as the decision to take a step back and reevaluate the situation between us. Life often presents us with challenges that make us question our choices. What have you learned from similar situations in your own life? Is there something from this story that resonates with you, something that can help you navigate your relationships? We would love to hear your thoughts. Please take a moment to comment below and share one thing you've learned and will bring to practice in your own life. Your insights are always appreciated. If you like this video, please leave your comment below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories, reflections, and life lessons. We truly appreciate your support, and we can't wait to bring you more content. Take care, and remember that sometimes life's toughest moments can teach us the most.